Good afternoon and welcome to our Community Day virtual program, Say It Loud. I'm going to allow a couple of seconds for our Zoom audience to filter in. As you make your way in, I want to make you aware of the chat feature that we have at the bottom, which is the Q&A button that you should see at the bottom of your screen for all of our Zoom viewers. We will be allowing the floor to ask questions. However, we will be getting to those questions at the end of the program. So feel free as we go through the program to type in your questions in our Q&A feature located at the bottom of the Zoom screen. And for all of you who are watching via Facebook Live, I want you all to know that you all can ask questions. You just drop your questions into the Facebook comment section and those questions will be filtered to us. I do want to acknowledge that we may not be able to get to all of your questions, but we're going to try our best to get through as many as possible. And I'm just going to do a quick check to see how our numbers are looking. Give a couple more seconds for those viewers who are straggling in. And as we wait for those viewers who are straggling in, I just want to also highlight the fact that we have our program for next Sunday or next Saturday, our Pride celebration, our Newark Pride celebration that will be happening virtually. So if you have not registered, I would ask that you will go ahead and make sure to register. And I think we are going to go ahead and get started. All right, so good afternoon. I'm Darryl Dwayne. I am the coordinator of community engagement here at the Newark Museum of Art, and I am joined by two amazing individuals. They are here to be a part of our conversation titled Newark, the Progressive City. And in this conversation, we're going to have an insightful discussion about the impacts that the 1967 Newark uprising has had on today's city and the continued fight for social justice. So we're going to be talking a little bit to them about their personal experiences, as well as political views and context to this, along with the arts and how can the arts play a role in the healing of our community and the healing of individuals who live throughout the community. So with that being said, to no further ado, I introduce to you Linda C. Harrison, the director and CEO of the Newark Museum of Art, and Mayor Ras Baraka. Thank you both for joining us. How are you all doing today?
Terrific, terrific. Thank you,
Excellent.
Darryl.
Yeah.
So
Um,
I'm going to pass.
Go ahead, Darryl.
I'm going to just pass the baton to Linda, and I'll be on the sidelines waiting. Take it from there.
Thank you, Darryl. I am excited that all of you have joined us this afternoon. We've had a full day of really talking about the 1967 uprising and what is happening now. I'm reminded that as we reflect on the conversations that we've had all day, that about 2 years ago, I was reflecting on whether or not to move to Newark, to come and lead the Newark Museum of Art through its transformation. And one of the key drivers that helped me make my decision was the wonderful and fabulous Mayor Ras Baraka. I had heard him speak. I had read about his vision. I was fortunate enough to actually hear him for the first time live just about a year and a half ago. And there was no doubt in my mind that to be in a city with a leader that says that they are going to take this city and transform it, particularly since the narrative when you are not in this city has always been to the city that is not safe, the city that is not moving. And indeed, this is a progressive city, and we want to say it out loud. And part of that saying it out loud was our all gathering today to talk about different aspects of this narrative of this new city. I know that I wanted to kick off really asking the mayor about his part of his story, because he grew up here, he went to public schools here. He also was the principal of Central High School, and a lot of people who have not been part of this world. I wanted to really find out what is encouraging, what encourages you most about the changes that you've seen here in the city, and that what gives you hope for the future? A lot of us, we come to this city and we see that it is a city that is redefining what it means to be a model city. And I wanted to just kick it off getting your thoughts about that.
So first, thank you, Linda, for having me. I appreciate all of the wonderful comments. We do our best, and we're glad to have you here. You've been a breath of fresh air for us at the museum. So we thank you for all the work that you're doing down there. The one thing I can say about the thing that brings me the most encouragement is just the consistency in things that are happening here. People are not losing sight, even in the middle of this pandemic and all of the things that are going on. People have not lost sight in Newark's potential and where it's going to go. I grew up in this city, and we've had fits and starts, periods of times. We must have the longest running renaissance in the history of the world. We've had all kinds of hope about things changing, and we never saw that. For example, across from City Hall, we had a building that was supposed to be the tallest building in the world. It was called the Renaissance Towers. It started and then it stopped. And for a large part of my childhood, it was a half-built building right across from the street from City Hall. And it just was like a monument to me of, a Renaissance that could not really get off the ground. And I just think the consistency, and it's not been perfect, but it's definitely been consistent. People are trying to invest in the city, are moving to the city, talking about Newark in a different way. Nationally, we're involved in conversations that we weren't involved in before, kind of progressive conversations, Newark in a new way, tech conversations, development, everything. And we're just trying to really muscle through it and get it right. And there's a lot of engagement, like locally, a lot of people, whether they agree or disagree, there are a lot of people talking about what Newark should be and what it should look like. And I just think there's a new and different problems that we have not had in a very, very long time. Before, we couldn't even talk about gentrification because nobody was coming to the city. Like, there was no development, no investment, anything happening in this town at all. Now that we can have these kind of discussions, I invite them. The discussions about housing and the way it should look, development and business and all these other kind of things that we are fighting for. The reimagination of the museum, of the library, of of the arts community, and the development that's being pictured and envisioned down there, and how to get Newark arts community involved in that. These are great discussions. We weren't able to have them. I'm just glad we're having them now. And the consistency of those discussions and the development is still happening. Even in the middle of this, people are still calling and trying to make sure that their projects are moving and things that are going to continue to happen.
I am struck by that you want to embrace having these conversations. A lot of times, gentrification and moving forward and it's in this thoughtful way are not usually in the same sentence, or the city wants to embrace it, particularly the city's leader. And this notion of civic engagement. You had an event where you talked about civic engagement is part of self-care. And we've been talking, self-care has been talked about and it's top of mind a lot for the last 4 months because of our sheltering in place, our doing more, trying to manage the current business, whatever our business, whether it's the culture business or the business of the city, and then looking forward and what those ideas are. So one doesn't usually think about civic engagement connected to self-care. Could you share with us why you believe that to be true, why these two things are really connected?
Well, obviously, the city is made up of people, and not really of buildings and streets and all of the things that buildings are useless unless people go in them and give it function. And the people have to be well. They have to take care of themselves. They have to be mentally and emotionally stable. We have to take care of ourselves, and self-care is incredibly important when you're talking about a community and being able to move the community forward in a progressive and positive way. We have to always talk about taking care of each other, taking care of our families, taking care of our communities. That's of paramount importance to making sure that the city itself is healthy, right? Even in our engagements and the things that are going on, we have to be focused on improving ourselves as individuals and our community as a whole.
What does can you give us an example of what that looks like in terms of the civic engagement? Is it are we looking at what we take care of ourselves so we can be more engaged and more involved as volunteers and ambassadors of the city? What's
Absolutely.
that?
Absolutely. You're not only just an ambassador and you volunteer. The community is your community, and so people have to take ownership of that. And for many years, we elect people, and then we go about our business, and then we complain about them, and then we put somebody else on in an office, and then we do the same thing, as opposed to engaging in what's going on, engaging in public safety, engaging in cleanliness in your neighborhood, engaging in school systems, engaging in making your neighborhood better. That's important. And one thing I learned in politics is that, before when I was an activist, I usually hung around people who agree with me all the time, right? And so you find yourself in this vacuum, and you're always around people who always agree with you, and you never really get challenged to the level that you need to be challenged at. And when you get out here and you talk to people, and you begin to see these points of view and realize that everybody says they're the community, and they usually mean them and the 10 people they know. This is the community. And so our job is to bring everybody together, right? And get people involved in a healthy kind of engagement around developing and moving the community forward with many different points of view and perspectives, and do that in a healthy way, whether it's cleaning up your neighborhood, whether it's exercising or doing yoga, or being involved in arts, or doing things in a museum. I grew up coming to the museum as a child, right? My mother and father brought me to the museum every Saturday to participate in activities in the museum as a young person. I didn't always like it, but I definitely benefited from it as an adult. And that's because I wanted to be around my friends. But ultimately, those kind of experiences improved my individual outlook, my outlook on life, right? My well-being. And that's engaging in community activity, while at the same time being able to develop your self-care and sense of person and people.
Yeah, this is where the museum, this museum was founded by this guy called John Cotton Dana
Right.
111 years ago. But on the principle, though, that this would not be a museum that would collect European art. This would be a museum that would actually have collections of the people who do not have their voices heard, our African collection, our Asian collection, and that it would be a museum of the people. And that's what we're really charged with. What fundamentally, I'd like to think that we're not just being engaged in the community just because of the current crisis, whether it's COVID-19 or the execution of George Floyd, that we have had a history of this, and now we're leaning in even more because we see that there are even wider gaps, and we want people to know, coming to the museum, this museum is going to be and will continue to be a museum for the people, where you can volunteer. You can have those difficult conversations here, and we want to continue that. And part of that continuation, I was really struck by, you did a couple of things that in a crisis, a city doesn't necessarily put this as a priority. You set aside $750,000 for the artists and the arts community organizations, and really put some meat into it by creating the position of Director of Art and Culture. And this is a bold move in this time. And I wonder if you could share with us how there are critics who may say, no, you should not do this. This is not the right thing. We have more important issues to address. What did you say to those folks who said, no, put art at the bottom of the list yet again?
Well, art is useful, right? It's life, it's living, it's health, it's imagination, it's creativity, it's what we want and what we need to see, and people create that idea. Plus, art is an economic engine for municipalities and cities, and people don't really understand the relationship between art and culture and a vibrant economy. They go to New York all the time, but they're not able to make that connection. That they go to New York for plays and art and museums and libraries and festivals. And the arts community is what makes people want to be in the city, want to be a part of what's going on. If the city is ever going to rebound, we have to embrace our art tradition, our art history here, our young artists, the collectives that are here that can burst into the latest thing. I grew up in a household where, I knew artists who are popular now. They were doing street theater, right? They were doing plays in laundromats and blocking off streets and doing plays in the streets, the paintings in neighborhoods. My father used to take jazz bands and put them on the corner of Clinton Avenue and Irvin Turner and let them play all day, or put them on a flatbed truck and drive them around the city and play, because he thought art and culture was a weapon, right? We could use it to develop, to create, to imagine, or some people use it to even destroy. But at the end of the day, art is a valuable, valuable part of our livelihood, whether it's our physical livelihood or our economic livelihood.
I am so pleased to hear you say that art is part of that economic engine, because rarely does a city transform itself, let alone continue to thrive, without the arts engine, as you refer to it, because we know that this can impact lives. Even the family where their kid is at our summer camp, and all of a sudden that kid is sharing with their parents about a piece of art that they saw and what that means. And ultimately, it's also giving an opportunity to really be a communicator of whatever the issues may be, or whatever your ideas are. And we want to be able to support that. One of the areas that I just thought was, I was so proud of, and a number of folks were proud of this, texting me when this happened, was, wow, look how Newark is handling their protest march. And you led the march. And it was a peaceful protest around the George Floyd execution. This protest happening around the world, and the way that you handled this, in addition to how you looked at the elegant solution of removing the Christopher Columbus monument in Washington Park. What was your thought process on now what has become the model? And this is why we want to talk out loud about this, because we really are a model of how we can have these aggressive contemporary points of view that are different, and yet how it was handled was very different, from the police department with Newark to the community that marched, all of these different aspects that in other cities it was just exploding.
Sure. So I want to say first, I was a part of it. I mean, Larry Hamm and People's Organization for Progress, they organized and led the march. Larry Hamm is a seasoned organizer, and he knew what he was doing because he's done this several times. And the police in Newark, we didn't come out there with the intent to break up the march, right? We came out there with the intent of making sure everybody was safe. No tear gas, rubber bullets, military equipment, helmets and battalions. We didn't come out there like that. And so that was a part of it as well. And it was a host of community people in that march as well, young as well as old, who understood the history of this city, who were just as outraged as everybody else in the nation, but understood that 50 years after the Newark Rebellion, we still trying to rebuild our city. 50 years that we went through this whole process, and we still fight against police brutality today. So what those actions don't necessarily mean that we're going to get what we need, right? It's just a protracted and consistent struggle. And folks were out there in the march, making sure that people understood that they expressed themselves, so that the headline the next day doesn't read "City Burns Again," that it reads "Protesters March Against Police Brutality and for the Justice for George Floyd," because that is where we want to keep the attention on: justice for George Floyd, march against police brutality, not the city burns again, 1967. We'd have been still talking about that today if that would have happened, because the press and the media would have loved to eat that and make that the story and divert our attention away from George Floyd. That's why I'm so happy that it happened. I participated in it. You know, I spoke, I had my own press conference with Larry Hamm, and then afterwards I spoke in a march with them all the way to the beginning. To the end, because you know I believe in it. I've marched with Larry Hamm dozens of times when I was a young boy out of college. So it was very natural for me to be out there with him again.
And the police department, and we know that there is a need to reform, but your police department also is made up. It's a different mix than it was, right?
Sure.
In '67, but it's a different mix than your average city.
It's a different mix than it was 5 years ago. You know?
Yeah.
So right now we're 70% people of color. Black and brown. We have over 200 women on the police department, many in supervisory roles. We're about to put an African-American woman in charge of internal affairs soon. These are things that we are doing purposefully and deliberately. The consent decree has forced us to do policy change. So we had a use of force policy change 2 years ago, right? And people are now talking about use of force a change. That's why when things happen in the city, we can respond to it and fire them and indict people early. It's against our policies right away. And that's been helpful for us. All of the extra training, de-escalation training, implicit bias training, and police officers that are working with clergy and citizens and community-based organizations that are using alternative methodology to help reduce violence and crime outside of just police. The important thing is the police know that they are part of the solution, that they are not the solution.
Yeah. This is what's exciting to me about this too is that there was just a celebration of this ordinance that you did, the Office of Violence Prevention and Trauma Recovery.
Yeah.
And this is where now that the police precinct, the first district, I believe it is, where the '67 rebellion started, is going to be shut down. Yes. Is that later this year or by December? And you also, in this ordinance, there is a outlaw against group activity coming from white supremacists,
right?
And that they would be also labeled terrorists.
Right.
This is really forward-thinking, progressive thinking. How did this come about? And then how do you see this being identified for other cities to follow your lead on this? And what can we as residents do to support this type of ordinance?
Well, there's a lot of national caution, national caution around these issues, a lot of discussion about it. So this is not the first time people have had these discussions. I think that the George Floyd issue propelled it to the front and really gave us the impetus and the strength, people marching, protesting. And that's the use of protest and march, right? Lyndon Johnson told Martin Luther King, you have to make me do it, right? So the protest creates the environment where it becomes easier for these elected officials to do the things that they think should happen or do things that they don't think should happen even, right? So, it becomes easier for us to make these things happen. A violence prevention office, we were already using police money to hire social workers. We were already using police dollars to try to help support, alternative police organizations or community-based organizations. But this helped us, this whole defund movement helped us to push in a way where we can codify it. And so these guys are not out there fighting for grants. They have consistent money coming in so they can do the work that they're doing and grow it to scale across the city and not just do it in one area of our community. But, the Klan is a terrorist organization and everybody knows that. Nobody does have the courage and the will to say it. We've been terrorized by the Klan for centuries. We've never been angry with the Klan because of what they said. So it's not about an issue of speech. It's about an issue of their actions. They've lynched and burned and blew up churches and killed children. And so if any organization should be named a terrorist organization, these white supremacist organizations should be called that. Even the state of New Jersey said that these organizations are the greatest threat to the state of New Jersey now than any other organization. And we need to label it, identify it, and say what it is.
Yeah, this is uh, being able to actually say these words. This is also where museums have to say these words, have to say the words white supremacist, racial equality. We have very easily say or refer to Black people, but we don't refer to white people. And
Right.
white people may have contributed to this, to
Sure.
the situations that we're in, particularly these gaps. And this is where I think the last 4 months have allowed for these kind of real conversations. And your ordinance, it's one of those, the power is being used to really bring this kind of situation to light. I've been reading Rahm Emanuel's book on the mayors are really the leaders of the world. And you are involved with 10 other mayors where you've been looking at how to have guaranteed income. And you've been doing this, you've been talking about this initiative in addition to some of the innovative things you've done under COVID since our COVID-19 crisis. Not only providing food for people, but also looking at how to provide food and housing for our residents without homes. How are you, the group of mayors, how are you looking at really having this stick and be part of the new progressive cities and be part of the change, be that model? How do you really get this to work?
So one, we're using our bully pulpit collectively. We're trying to come together, like you said, around UBI, and more mayors are actually joining that. So that number is greater than 11 now. More mayors across the country are becoming a part of it. It's being led by Mayor Tubbs out of Stockton, who started it. Had a pilot there first, and it went to Jackson, Mississippi, and now we're doing it in Newark and Chicago and different places, Atlanta. We believe guaranteed income is something that is necessary. We understand that the country understands that it's necessary in a crisis. That's why they're giving out these stimulus checks. We think that stuff should be consistent. I've been writing editorials. We are speaking at our organizations, whether it's the urban mayors or U.S. Conference of Mayors or all these other organizations, African American Mayors Association, trying to get them to push these things. And we're leaning on our legislators, both state and federal government, to get them to understand that we don't want to go back to normal. The normal is what got us in this situation. The normal got us into COVID, and the normal got George Floyd killed, murdered. We want to go away from normal, right? And the normal even is what's a part of all these recent upticks in murders and homicides that are going on around the country. That's part of the normal gap of poverty, of inequality, and all these things that happen. So we have to change that, whether it's for universal basic income, whether it's our residents without addresses. In the middle of COVID, we find money from the federal government. They heap money upon us from somewhere. We get to rent a hotel, lease a hotel for months, and put 300, almost 400 residents without addresses in there. Give them food and services, 3 meals a day. We get to do these things because it's a crisis. These are things that we have to have the resources to do all the time. And a lot of people think cities can do this on their own, but we can't do that and pave the streets and provide police and pay for schools and do all the things that's necessary and create jobs. We need more investment, more revenue. We need an urban Marshall Plan, right, in these communities that have a huge gap that have been left behind to help us come up out of the hole in the pit that has been placed there for us. And so all of these programs that we're pushing for are designed to do that. And we're trying our hardest to make sure that we don't go back, and that everything that they found money and resources to do, that we continue to do those things in perpetuity.
Well, that's what we're seeing. The world is starting to listen. I don't know if you've had a chance yet in your busy schedule to look at the New York Times weekend edition. The arts section is talking about Newark art. Newark in a crisis really still is supporting its artists, and what does that look like? I know that communication is really a key part of sharing what's going on with the city, with the residents, and you've been really notoriously good at this. Your daily COVID-19 updates to us have really been insightful, not just about the pandemic, but just what's going on. And I'm wondering, could you share with us what has evolved and what has surprised you about the response to your daily COVID-19 updates?
It's amazing how much people love it, you know? I started off just trying to do it to give people information on the rates of the infection and numbers, just really to change people's behaviors and focus them on this virus and get them to be serious about it and understand that that's our number one enemy right now. We can get back to arguing when this is over, but right now we have to fight the virus. But it has turned into something completely different, right? People send me music they want me to play. That's how I started playing that. People send me music, they send me poetry, they send me essays, drawings, things they want to shout their kids out. It has become a real opportunity for people to feel like they're part of a larger kind of community. And it's been really insightful for me. And it tells me that our community is desperate to be just that, a community. Mm-hmm. And we have to provide the opportunity for us to be community, because our residents want it. They want to be community. They want to be attached and engaged to one another. And we have to create it.
I think this is a part of when you were talking about the civic engagement, that this is part of it, that there is this desire to be connected to the community. And it's so crazy that this pandemic, in the way that we have had to operate over the last 4 months, is actually this opportunity that's bringing us closer, having us be more knowledgeable about what's going on, what's happening. I wanted to circle back to ask you a question about technology, because one of the things I noticed when I just walked to the museum when we could pre-COVID, was the stations along Broadway that's communicating different information, as well as you can jump on the Wi-Fi. And you're one of the few cities that did this early on. We are challenged here at the museum with that gap of providing our content to those households that do not necessarily have access.
Right.
And with access, there's also that element of actually having a device. And we know that at least at the phone level, because we're talking about our digital strategies now, that we have to be able to have not just the folks who can afford all of the devices in their homes, right, and 5G. How do you see us closing that gap, that technology gap, so that those who do not have the Wi-Fi can actually get it and then get what we really want to deliver, the content?
Right. So pre-COVID, we were working on trying to provide the Newark Wi-Fi, the cable, to all of the housing authority complexes with the housing authority in the city for free. We were trying to make that happen. We were also supposed to expand all the kiosks that are downtown up into the neighborhoods as well. So we were working on a larger strategy to make those things happen. But also, during this pandemic, again, the Newark Public Schools gave out 9,000 Chromebooks to families that didn't have it, because the time forced us to do that, because virtual learning and forced people to do that. And it's still not, they still have a gap, but they closed it considerably. And so and so that means to me that it's possible for us to find the resources and the opportunity to make sure that all of our residents have access, at least in a rudimentary way, to the internet, at least to deal with education and workforce development. We have the ability to do that. Even Altice, the cable company, provided free Wi-Fi access for at least 30 days to some of the families that didn't have it. Obviously, that went away. And that's also proof that it can be done, right? So we have to begin leaning heavy into this area and beginning, whether it's a public-private kind of relationship, to make sure that everybody in the city has the opportunity to have access to Wi-Fi, a hard drive to be able to do it, and the other components that make it necessary, at least for educational and workforce development purposes in this town. We can do that. We have the ability. I've seen it, right now in the middle of this. We just have to have the will to make it happen.
How do you see the museum's role here? You've seen the museum through different parts of your life. How do you see us truly being authentically relevant and valuable in this, particularly in this area of education? Because here we have so much content that we know could be of value and support the education system. But what, if you were to give us advice on how we can be a collaborative, a real partner in this, what would that look like?
So there's a couple of ways. I think this conversation about the virtual world is incredibly important. The superintendent yesterday talked about to us on our daily calls that they're not only preparing for in person, they're preparing to make sure the virtual stuff stays, right? And I think you have a greater reach. And even in the city of Newark, our summer programs are more robust because we're able to offer all kinds of things virtually that we were not able to offer, in person. And I think that allows us to get into more homes, particularly, and it helps us push the argument that we need to make sure that everybody has access. And so that's important to help push this idea that everybody has access, so they have access to art and culture at a level that they couldn't have it at because they're not able to get down to the museum, that the museum can come to them in a virtual kind of way. Plus, I would talk about trying to partner with some of these, local-based arts collectives and arts organizations and nonprofits to provide opportunities to do things in neighborhoods outside of just the brick and mortar building downtown, to be able to provide them in areas outside of that area into the community, and partner with other organizations to offer content, whether it be art shows or artists coming in doing workshops or other things. And there's spaces to do that at throughout the city. But I would say partner with folks who are out there doing the work and just help them with content and resource and information so they can provide a greater level of content to the residents.
This, I'm glad you said that. This is great to know, because at the moment we are, though the digital strategy was part of our overall vision for the for 3 years, this upcoming 3 years. Because of this pandemic, we've really accelerated that, and now we see that we're touching many more people, and we want to continue it and not really be the same museum that we were before, because we see that this can be compelling. We can really reach the people that our mission charges us to really touch them, and completely understanding that everyone, even when the museum is free to Newark residents, can't get to museum location. And so we want to continue this effort, and I really, really appreciate that. I see that Darryl is back. Does that mean we're about to move into a question and answer before
Yeah, the
I ask
conversation
my
was so
last question?
good. I really didn't want to interrupt you all. I was like, but I do want to make sure that since the conversation revolves so much around community, that we also engage the community as a part of this conversation.
Yes.
So with that being said, for all of you who are viewing from our Zoom platform, by all means, if you have questions for either one of our panelists today, please go ahead and drop those questions in the Q&A. And again, if you're watching via Facebook Live, you can drop your questions in our comment section and we will filter through those questions and ask our panelists as well. But thank you both. Just before I jump into the questions, like phenomenal. Like I really have to say there's something to be said seeing community leaders who are not only stepping up and doing new initiatives that are maybe not considered the norm, but fighting to make sure that those initiatives take root and that to see people who look like me behind those initiatives. To be honest, that in itself is empowering, and I can say for the next generation helps us have even a bigger charge to follow behind. So I just wanted to say that before jumping into the questions. So we do have a question from one of our viewers, Roger C. Tucker. And this question is to the museum, but Raz may have Mayor Raz might have a few words to add in. So this question here reads, how will the museum continue to reinforce its current progressive strategies during COVID-19? Has been repositioning the Newark Museum of Art has been repositioning as a cultural and educational community resource center versus the old perception of the museum as non-inclusive institution for people of color. So Roger's question essentially is how will we continue to be progressive and including people of color as we move forward?
Well, I thank you for that question. Our commitment, we started a couple of years ago, actually by shifting our mission. We have had a very good foundation with our museum, but we know that for us to be a relevant museum in the 21st century, that people are first. People are first with my staff and the employees, and the public people are first. And that comes before our objects, believe it or not. And this is a shift from traditional museums where it's all about the objects, the people, well, okay, we hope they're okay. Are they okay? But no, we really are focused on not just diversity, but we're focused on inclusivity. And that means that we go deep into our organization to get ideas, not necessarily just from the leadership team. I can tell you that our reopening and recovery plan was developed and designed by the people in the museum, not the leadership team. And this is how we are looking at, through this lens of inclusivity, we're looking at across the organization and looking at how our learning and engagement artistic programming looks, where community voices are what we're listening to. That's what's helping drive our programming for the last 6-7 months, and we will continue to do this. It will also drive the exhibitions that you see, because we want you in the museum. We want this museum to be of the people, not a museum that's totally distant and we just happen to be located at 49 Washington Street in Newark.
And something that you and Raz both touched on earlier in regards to access, I think that's even more imperative in line with the response to the question, making sure that all communities have access to the museum and to the museum's programming. I don't know if Mayor Ras Baraka wanted to add any more words to that question or a response to that question.
I think that she dealt with it very right on the point. That's it. I mean, and what you said is right. The museum is made up of people, and that's what we need to understand. That it's living. It's not stoic and old and static, right? It is living, and so it's important to get people in there.
Well, with that being said, moving to our next question, which comes from Tara. So Tara wants to know, this question is for both of you. How do you feel about some of our amazing monuments in Newark? For instance, Lincoln in front of the courthouse. Are they considered art? Do they belong in the Newark Museum in order to protect them? And that was her question. She just wanted to say thank you for both of you all doing this today.
That's an excellent question. You want to jump on that?
I'll, I'll jump on that. I'll jump on that one first. That monuments are art, and monuments have been historically funded by one group of people, and that's been the majority, white men. And so we see these monuments that are white men. Perhaps it is time for the monuments, not that we are ignoring them, some to be replaced, some to be put in storage and perhaps brought back out in context of the entire story. And there needs to be new monuments. There could easily be a monument or two in every park in Newark about the women, the women of color, and that really helped this town, this city, this region. In addition, perhaps a monument around the 1967 rebellion. What would that look like? That is a piece of art that could be commissioned. So it's not just a crisp black and white answer, but I think that there is opportunity for us to shift what monuments look like, not only in the city of Newark, but around the country.
Yeah, a monument is exactly what it says. Something is for praise, right? So it's art. It is an expression of the praise of something that you think is the best of what you represent, right? And that's why people take offense to some monuments, because when people put up a monument to something, they're saying this is the best of what we represent. And if this is the best of what you represent means my denigration, then I have a problem with that, and it's uneasy for me to be in these spaces. And so the history of the world is changing, and the monuments to those things change. If you go, I mean, there are monuments all over the world, Sphinx and pyramids and all kinds of things all over the world. What was American monuments look like in the course of American history? What should we be looking at? And some of those things do belong in the museum, some of it, because I don't think that we want to erase history. I think it's important that we don't erase history. I think it's important that we understand the fullness of history, because that explains to us why we are where we are in the present and what we have to do as we move forward. So we don't want to erase history. You want to identify it, but you want to identify it in a kind of whole and rightful way. And that's why I took care in removing the Christopher Columbus statue, because there are different perspectives on what that means to people, right? And we were taught in the same educational system. The problem with the educational system is it's routed in white supremacy. So it has taught some people that being white made them superior and being black made them inferior. And in that, we've taught to idolize all of these people. And so pulling it down is an affront to people, because they've been miseducated just like you have been, right? And so they have to be re-educated. And you take care as a teacher, as an educator, you take care in educating people, right? Saying, listen, this is not good. It needs to be removed. We don't mean no disrespect to the Italian community or the history of Italians, but this is disrespectful. We have to remove this, and we can have dialogue about it as well. We can give it to you back, and we can put something up here that's more appropriate and relevant for where we are in this moment in history, right? And I think that's a discussion that we have to have, not just with ourselves, arguing with people who agree with us, but be brave enough to have a discussion with people who outright oppose to what you're saying.
And I think that's important context. Like, I think ultimately we have to keep in mind the context of what we're looking at these items through, right? The lens that we're looking at these items through, and context, and with context brings clarity. So totally agree with both of you. I want to move to our next question. This one comes from Tara. She actually has a question about the museum. She wants to know, do we know when the museum might open? Question mark. So I know both of you are anxious for that to happen, but I'm sure both of you also have words that you maybe want to share with Tara about the relevancy of how soon that may or may not happen. So either one of you can take that question.
Well, I'll jump in there and say that we have just wrapped up our reopening and recovery plan, and it's quite extensive. And we're looking at a phased-in approach. we have to do quite a few things we want to make sure that the museum is safe, that it's a healthy and safe environment for the staff as well as then the public in returning. So we're doing a staged in approach where the staff is essential workers are starting to return to the museum in preparation. And by the end of the summer, as we move into the fall, we will be ready, we will be poised to open the museum. We're targeting the first week in October. And this is essentially because there's so many things that we need to do, want to do to make this a safe environment for people to come. But though the physical museum is closed, we are more open than ever with our development of content and pushing that content out through various different platforms so that you will not miss us totally. But physically, we'll be able to open. And when we do, we will be at following all of the rules of the CDC, the state, and the city, in addition to just our museums in general. Will be opening at about a 25% capacity. So we're working on all of those aspects of what that will look like when you return. And we miss you.
We do in fact miss you all. This next question comes from Mark Little. This question is for Mayor Ras Baraka. How can you avoid gentrification of our neighborhoods? And I know you spoke on that earlier about welcoming dialogue about that. So here we have a question in direct response.
Absolutely. So gentrification is not like a button you push in City Hall. And I think people have think that there's a button you push and say, boom, gentrification, this is what we want and what we don't want. Which is why we have a committee Equitable Growth Commission that we created to kind of push back against the systemic ways gentrification happens. Gentrification is almost the negative side of the development of things that you're doing right. So the minute you begin to do things to improve your city, people begin to invest. And because the market around the city gets high, people from other places come here because they're actually seeking lower rents themselves. The fact is that the rent in their neighborhood is too high, so they come to your neighborhood, but your rent was lower than theirs, but they can afford to pay a little bit more than you. And so the market actually moves in that direction. And then you get apartments and housing that begins to cater to that market, as well as commercial development. They begin to push small commercial stores out and begin inviting larger businesses in. It really destroys the kind of fabric of the community. So we don't want to be this kind of cookie cutter Manhattan kind of place. We want to keep our community, the small mom and pop stores, the fabric, the diversity, the edginess about Newark. We have to figure out how to keep that and manage development at the same time. And so we need tons of resources to be able to do that. We create zoning laws that make it difficult for people to build or create anything they want. We force them to create affordability in their housing when they build, that they have to create affordability. We make them pay into Affordable Housing Trust Fund so we can develop projects in neighborhoods or keep the projects low. We have rent control that doesn't allow people to just go up on a rent arbitrarily. And we have office attendant legal services, so people can't just evict you arbitrarily either. And you get free legal advice and legal services in these places. But ultimately, all of the communities that we have to encourage home ownership. We have to encourage people in our community to begin to build in these neighborhoods and keep the prices low. So we develop land banking and land trust. So you circle areas of the community and say, we're going to keep the prices in this community at a certain level so that it won't chase people out of the community when there's development happening. And you do that by land banking and then creating a land trust. We just was able to establish a land bank, and then COVID hit. We're still moving forward on that and doing a land trust at the same time. So these are all market forces. It's all a part of, in capitalism, these are all the market forces that force working and poor people out, so that, in Europe, all the rich people live in cities, right? And the folks that are, more economically challenged live in the countryside. It's the reverse in America. And so, those things, those forces are beginning to change. People want to move to these cities and push people out. And we just have to put things in place. I'm going to tell you this, I don't care how many things we put in place, there has been no foolproof effort to completely stop gentrification anywhere in this country, short of completely changing the system we live in, right? What we're doing is mitigating it. We're putting stopgaps in place so that everybody isn't crushed completely by it, that we still have some community left and people that can live here and be a part of these neighborhoods at the same time. So we're working hard on that. I wish I could tell you that there was a magic pill that I had to make sure that the community is not gentrified. What I can tell you is we're going to fight like hell to make sure that people can afford to live in the neighborhoods they live in now.
Thank you for that. And that reinforces the idea behind voting, right? Making sure you vote political leaders in office that support your vision for your community. And I think that's exactly what needs to take place for Newark to continue to thrive in the direction that you just spoke to, Mayor Ras Baraka. With that being said, I want to ask one more question before passing it over to Linda. This last question is in regards to the museum, and this comes from John. So John wants to know, the Newark Museum of Art has a unique collection of pieces that speak to the issue of Black empowerment and equity. The collection is relevant as we look back at Newark's rebellion and forward to the justice issues raised by protests around the country today. Can the museum potentially share some of these pieces in an online exhibit as a possibility as a move towards future programming? So I'm going to pass that over to Linda.
That's a great question. And yes, we can. And yes, we will. This is what we have been looking at pre-COVID. We were looking at how to take our distinct collections across the board and be able to tell the very different stories, the untold stories, the Black stories, the Portuguese stories, the Afro-Mexican stories, even the African, Afro-Asian, and other areas and parts of the Asian diaspora. We have it here. And this is what, this is why I say we accelerated our digital strategy development, because we know we have the content to be able to speak to these various communities, and we will be bringing it forth, whether it's in digital or in person.
Thank you for that. And I just want to remind everyone as we come to a close that if you're interested in more virtual programs, that all of that is accessible on our website. So www.newarkmuseumofart.org. You can find all of that information in regards to virtual tours, in regard to virtual programs. We do multiple virtual programs like the one we're engaged in today. And we have a huge virtual program happening next Saturday for Pride Weekend. So definitely register for that. We have, we're partnered with multiple community partners, as Mayor Ras Baraka spoke to earlier. It's about the community and being engaged with the community. So from the Grammy Museum Experience, along with the New Jersey Devils, we have a lot of cool partnerships we're doing and collaborating with for that Pride celebration next weekend. So tune back in virtually then. And I want to close out with leaving the floor back to Linda. I know there may be one last and final question you might have for our beloved Mayor Ras Baraka.
Well, I thought you can't have the art mayor here and end a conversation with him without, say, a message of hope or perhaps a poem. I don't know. Maybe we can ask if he may just share some final words for us.
Yeah. Absolutely. First, I'm encouraged by this program, encouraged by obviously your leadership there at the museum, and we're trekking forward. We're pushing forward, and the world is not easy. It is not simple. It is complex. It is diverse. And so it takes thoughtful and committed and collective folks to get us through this. It doesn't mean we'll always agree. It doesn't mean we'll always see eye to eye. We always have to see the finish line together, right? And we have to find a way to get us across that finish line together as much as we possibly can and do, And so we want to be able to see the world in the way we paint it, right? In the way we write it, in the way we speak it, right? We want to see the world the same way we saw it as 15, 16-year-olds in our grandmother's kitchen, cornbread and black beans and rice, right? So we want to imagine that world and create that world, but you need the people to do it, right? Together, collectively. We can't just talk about it and argue about it. We got to actually roll up our sleeves and build it. That's why I like being a mayor, and that's why I like the people of my community, because we have a lot of builders in this city, and we're going to build the world we want to see.
Thank you, Mayor.
Right.
There is nothing else to say that we will continue to be activists and not just talk. And this is what the new museum is about.
God bless you.
Thank you, Darryl.
Thank you.
Thank you.